Anyway, however, we go back to shul that night. This was a 21-day trip, right? So we can go for a long time. And we go to shul, and then we are off to make contact with our refusniks. First meeting with refusniks. First time Russia, going to find Mr. Weitzman, right? So we have a map, right? And we have an address, okay? Now, it's not a big city, right? I mean, it's not like we're in that big a place. We find the street on the map. So we go to where the street is, and again, it's wooden fences all the way along with sort of random numbers. And there's no way that we're going to find, and we find out later that really what it is each gate, you walk into a gate, and then there's like 10 houses inside a courtyard, and each one has a different number. And here we are in the middle of nowhere going, Gewalt, we're not going to be able to find any refusniks, we'll fail, we'll go back to Montreal, we'll say we didn't meet anybody, it will be a waste, we don't know what to do. So finally, we take like this leap of faith, and we stop this guy on the street, and we say to him, address, help find, whatnot. Fortunately, he was an American Indian, so he spoke our language. And we say, help us find, help us find this address. And he then, really wanting to be very helpful, hops over a fence and tells us we're in the wrong area, and he takes us to where this address is going to be. And we go, and we're walking like this, Alma-Ata, 2 Canadians, wine under the arm like this, agadas under the other arm, box of muramatzes, right? And we're trying to just act natural, walking around Alma-Ata, right? So, we then go, we knock on the door, and the man comes to the door, and we say, Shalom. And gray-haired gentleman of about 50 years old, and he just starts to cry. Figured, we don't know. Like, we just don't know what's happening. And he brings us into his house, and it turns out that this man named Weitzman, Mr. Weitzman, I don't remember his Weitzman, was having his Pesach Seder. Only he really wasn't. He was having a Seder. Was it a Seder? Wasn't a Seder? There were 18 members of his family sitting around the dinner table. They knew it was Pesach, so they were having this family gathering. But they didn't know what to do. I mean, they didn't know what they were supposed to do. All they knew they were supposed to get together and have a Seder. But what do you do with a Seder? They didn't know. I mean, so they were sitting there and having supper. And what happens? 2 Jews from Montreal show up with agadas and wine and whatnot, like Eliyahu and Levi. But that's what he thought. And we begin to talk to him, and he tells us a really interesting story about himself. He also tells us that we have to be very careful because his sister-in-law is not Jewish, and, like he can't really speak too openly, she'll leave or talk. But in the meantime, he tells us the story. His name is Weitzman. He introduces us to his 2 children. One is named Misha, and one is named Arkady. He says, but that's their name for school. At home, they're called Moshe and Aharon. And you know what Weitzman did for a living? Mr. Weitzman was an irrigation engineer. This is in 1979. He's 50 years old. He finished school just after the war, early 50s. And he had to decide what he wanted to be in life. And he hoped that someday in his lifetime he might have the opportunity to go to Eretz Israel. He didn't know anything about Israel, except that it was dry. He knew it was dry. So he figured what he would become was an irrigation engineer, so that if he ever got to Eretz Israel, he would at least be able to offer them something. And that was 25 years before he even thought about applying to go there. And come to his house, and we begin to make a Seder. We take out our Haggadah, and we begin to go through. Now, sitting around, we've got 18 Jews. None of them have ever been to the Seder. None of them have ever been to the Seder. So we start going through the Seder. Now, how do we do this? Right? You ask what language we're talking. Right? Somebody was going to ask that. So, Mr. Weitzman spoke some English. Mrs. Weitzman didn't. But the kids were help. She spoke Yiddish. No. So, I read in Hebrew. Now, I don't really speak Yiddish. That was a real problem. I really needed it, but my travel partner spoke Yiddish. So I read the Hebrew, and I translated it into English. for my partner, who then translated it into Yiddish, for Mr. Weitzman, who then translated it into Russian. So everybody's talking at the same time, which is like your normal Seder, right? And it's going round and round. And they're not treating it like we treat a Seder. They're really serious about this Avadim Hayinu business, and that this business about being in Egypt. Right. And we go through. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, we finish this Seder and we're exhausted. And then Weitzman tells us that what he'd really like is he'd like to learn Hebrew. He's 50-some-odd years old, doesn't know. And we say, oh, what an amazing coincidence we happen to have a Hebrew book. Not with us, but we had a copy. Anybody know the book Elef Milim? Called 1,000 Words. It's a basic introductory text to Hebrew. Okay? And we had one of them. We started off with 2, but one was taken away in customs. Now we have 1 left. The problem is that you give the book to Weitzman, and it starts off, and the first word is Shalom, Shalom Abba, Shalom Ima, I don't remember the book, but something like that. It's as elementary as you can get, but Weitzman can't read Aleph Bet Gimel Daled Hey. Doesn't know what to do. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, with Mr. Weitzman and Mrs. Weitzman and Misha and Arkady and Moshe and Aaron and another cousin, we take out a big piece of paper and we start with a Hebrew lesson. And we're teaching these Jews, all different ages, how to write Aleph Bet Gimel Daled Hey Vav Zayin. One slight inconsistency you might ask. Wasn't it Yontif? It was Pesach. And what were you doing writing Aleph Bet Gimel Daled? You know, you make decisions in your life. You know? You make decisions. And at that moment, in that time and in that place, it just seemed more important. One has to make a decision. And there is a head there for doing certain things in Russia. But Yontif, notwithstanding, we wrote Aleph Bet Gimel Daled on the thing, and they wrote it, and they were very excited. And we had been told, there's another problem, we had been told to get back to the hotel early. Because you're in Alma-Ata, and there's nothing happening in the middle of the night. What are you doing out till... But how do we pull ourselves away and say, we can't teach you, we'll teach you Aleph through Yud, and next year we'll come back and learn the rest of the alphabet because we have to go back to the hotel. Figured, we'll stay, whatever they'll do to us, they'll do. And some 3 o'clock in the morning, Weitzman says, we'll give you a lift back to the hotel. He had a car. We said, Yontif, we don't have to, we're walking. And he says, you can't walk. And it wasn't far, but he says, you'll get lost. So he comes with us, and the 3 of us in the middle of the night are walking. And we get to the hotel, and the door's locked. We left the hotel. We're not expecting anybody back at 3 o'clock in the morning in Alma-Ata. And there we are, and we're knocking on the door. Finally, this woman comes, she goes, what do you want? A good question. So I said, well, I'd like to buy your hotel so I could... just let me in, right? And she let us in,